DT built an empire on the architecture of falsehoods. To him, reality was a malleable substance. This story is about a serial liar, something that shifted whenever he spoke. When facts blocked his path, he branded them fabrications. When he needed a triumph, he simply invented one. His advisors whispered a grim superstition in the capital. If DT ever uttered the truth, the world would end. They could not have known how close that threshold truly was. Deep beneath the granite roots of the mountains, the air vibrated with a low, unnatural hum. Dr. Mara Voss stood before the Chronos Gate, her hand hovering over the final activation sequence. This was not a vehicle. It was a window into the raw, unvarnished fabric of time. She issued one last warning about the machine's volatility, noting that time was a living, reactive entity that did not suffer fools. The terminal flickered to life, bathing the cold, damp stone of the lab in a pulse of blinding white light. Above ground, the cameras turned toward DT. He stepped to the podium, cleared his throat, and prepared to weave another layer of his reality. The gate began to churn, sensing the distortions spreading through the air, waiting for the first lie to strike. DT adjusted the microphone, his posture rigid and practiced. He looked out at the sea of lenses and declared the Chronos Gate his own genius discovery, citing years of private research that never existed. As the words left his lips, the sensors in the distant lab screamed. The machine was not tracking history, it was tracking the distortion of reality itself. It had identified a source of infinite falsehoods. In the conference hall, the air began to thicken, tasting of ozone and wet earth. A low, grinding sound vibrated through the floorboards, rattling the water glasses on the podium. Reporters stopped scribbling. They looked toward the stage, their faces etched with sudden he lying again. Sharp confusion as the light in the room shifted to a sickly, impossible shade. People started saying he was lying again. Behind the podium, the atmosphere folded. A tear, violent and silent, ripped through the air. It calls him, "Come to me, liar." The space where the backdrop had stood collapsed into a jagged, swirling void. DT turned. His prepared smile froze as the reality he had spent years crafting began to dissolve into nothingness. "Damn," DT said. The portal expanded, indifferent to his protests, pulling at the very foundation of the stage. The void surged, cold and relentless, dragging him through the collapse. Gravity failed. Then, it returned with a bone-jarring thud. DT slammed face down into a thick, suffocating mire. The air here was heavy, smelling of ancient rot and wet decay. He rolled over, gasping, only to find the sky an impossible, bruised shade of purple. There were no cameras, no microphones, and no advisors to shield him. He stood up, shaking mud from his hands, and shouted at the dense wall of trees, "I will tell the truth, next time," demanding an explanation. The jungle did not answer. Then, the ground began to pulse. A rhythmic thud echoed through the trees, each impact vibrating deep into his chest. A Tyrannosaurus Rex tore through the foliage, its hide scarred and its teeth glistening like obsidian shards. DT raised a hand, attempting to bark a command, to bluff his way back into control, but his voice was thin. DT said, "I cannot lie to myself out this." Pathetic sound against the roar that followed. The beast lowered its head, sniffing the air with predatory focus. DT scrambled backward, his boots sliding in the muck, and dived into the shadows of ferns the size of buildings. He was no longer the architect of reality. He was the prey. Weeks of hiding had eroded his defenses. DT huddled in a shallow ditch, his breath ragged. Through the gaps in the giant ferns, he watched the raptors circle. Their hissing breaths were hot against his skin, and the rhythmic clicking of their talons on stones signaled the end. He clawed at the mud, his fingers striking cold metal. It was a fragment of the Chronos Gate, jagged and pulsing with a dull, dying light. He clutched it, desperate for a way out. He began to recite his usual slogans, "Thou should not lie," his voice cracking as he projected power that no longer existed. The screen on the device flashed a sharp, unforgiving red. False. The raptors moved closer, their eyes locked on his throat. He felt the cold reality of the jungle pressing in, inescapable and absolute. The armor of his ego shattered. He stopped shouting. He looked directly into the void of the fragment. His voice dropped to a raw, shaking whisper. "I am scared." The machine hummed, "Liar," an intense blue light erupting from the metal to bathe the clearing. The air began to fold, and the raptors recoiled as the portal ignited, pulling him into the blinding white center of the light. The sterile air of the laboratory hit him like a physical blow. DT stumbled, hands clutching the cold metal of the table to steady his shaking legs. Dr. Mara Voss and her team stood frozen. This lying Mur is back. His eyes were wide as the portal behind him hissed shut. They surged forward, demanding to know what he had seen in the abyss. Miss Voss said, "Let me help this lying man." DT opened his mouth, the familiar script of a grand narrative ready to spill out, but his throat seized. The memory of the mud, the obsidian teeth, and the suffocating fear surged back. He looked at the researchers, his hands trembling violently. "I was afraid," he whispered. The admission hung in the room, heavy and absolute. Silence followed, profound and suffocating. But the reprieve was hollow. A sharp hum emanated from the Chronos Gate. It flickered back to life, the display casting a cold blue glow over his face. The screen scrolled a new, mechanical directive. Reality distortion reduced. Monitoring will continue. We will take this lying man. Again, a chill traced his spine. He looked at the machine, then at the open door, realizing the portal had not just brought him home. It had shackled him to the truth. Somewhere in the unyielding past, the predators were still waiting, and the gate remained open, watching for his next inevitable lie.